Obrigada.
All right. So we'll get started. It's a little bit afternoon, and I think we have a good amount of people in who had signed up. So I just want to start by welcoming everyone here to the second of our three, like we were just saying, Book and Collections Club programs for this year. Today, we're excited to have the opportunity to talk with you all about Chiquinho by Baltasar Lopes. And this is sort of as part of our work to uncover Cape Verdean stories in Duxbury. We hope that this conversation will spark some more stories and histories. So if any of you have any you'd like to share with us, either today or maybe afterwards, I'm going to put both me and Carolyn's emails in the chat. So you guys will all have that, and you're welcome to contact us. We're also super excited to be joined by Dr. Carlos Almeida, who is one of the translators of Chiquinho. Dr. Almeida is an associate professor of Portuguese, and he is the director of Luso Centro at Bristol Community College in Far River. He's also a visiting lecturer in the Department of Portuguese at UMass Dartmouth. He received a Bachelor of Arts from UMass Dartmouth, a Master of Arts in Hispanic Literatures and Linguistics, and a doctorate in Lusophone Literatures and Cultures from UMass Amherst. He specializes in Portuguese and Cape Verdean languages, literatures, and cultures. He's a board of directors member of the Cape Verdean Association in New Bedford, a member of the Cape Verdean Committee of the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and of the Cape Verdean Committee of the Whaling Museum in Nantucket, among many other things. So we want to say thank you very much for being here, Dr. Almeida, and for offering to be part of our program. All right, so before we get started, there are a couple of quick things that I want to mention. The program is going to be broken into two segments, kind of like the last presentation, if any of you guys were there for that. Carolyn's going to start with a sort of quick presentation about the cranberry history in Duxbury and on the immigrants from Cape Verde that moved here to work in that industry. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, you can send them either directly to me in the chat, or you can put it to everyone in the chat, and then we'll read them out loud. And so we'll do that after the presentation. We'll open up to discussion and to answer any questions either to us or with Dr. Almeida. And before we wrap up today, I'm going to drop a couple links in the chat for our next book club, which is in May. So that one's going to feature the novel called Beheld by Tarashia Nesbitt, and another link to our program next Thursday with Plymouth Patuxet, which is called 13 Moons and 12,000 Years. That program is going to be awesome. It explores the 12,000 years of Wampanoag history and how communities, past and present, have adapted and sustained their seasonal, the 13-moon life cycles amid changing natural, social, and political landscapes. So we hope that you guys can join us for some of those as well. So in celebration of the original language of Chiquinho, and to welcome any fellow Cape Verdeans or anyone who speaks Portuguese, I wanted to say obrigada pela vossa presença neste discurso do livro Chiquinho. Estamos imensamente felizes de poder compartilhar convosco este livro importante e esperamos que possam apreciar pouco da história cape-verdeana aqui em Duxbury. So, Carolyn, it's all yours.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. So this is not, we're here to discuss the novel and the Cape Verde immigration to Duxbury. So I don't want to bore you with a lot of cranberry history, but I did want to just set up the stage of Duxbury in that industry, because that is how many of our Cape Verde families came here. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Let's see. Sorry, everyone. Let me move this over here. Okay, so this presentation is going to be in two parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cranberry industry. Then Mel, for those friends joining us who maybe are not familiar with the Cape Verde Islands, like where they are and how immigration originated there, she's going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to get to the novel. So Just a little bit about the cranberry. So it was wild growing here in the marshy lands of eastern
Are you
Massachusetts.
what? Are you paying attention?
Something that the
I'm
Pilgrims,
listening to what they're saying, yeah.
let's put,
Sorry.
that's okay. When the Europeans arrived here, the cranberry was already being picked wild by the native populations, and it's something that the Europeans would have recognized. There were similar fruits in the Netherlands and England where they had come from. So here we have this very important dietary staple that's wild growing in the boggy, marshy areas. It is not something that is being cultivated. There's very low labor involved, in fact, no labor in its growth. People go out and pick it in the wild. And this is a modern picture of folks picking wild cranberries in Truro. And what was important about the cranberry is that it was something that was available to everyone. So if you were poor, you could go and pick the cranberry. There was a growing demand for the fruit, so you could pick it and sell it, or you could pick it and eat it yourself and preserve it. So it was a really important fruit for this area. But like all things that begin to make money, laws began to be passed to kind of prohibit people from picking whenever the fruit was ripe. So if you owned a marshy, boggy area and that was your private property, you may want to start stopping people from picking what is your cranberries. And also towns on their town land began regulating when folks could go and pick cranberries, and they started taxing cranberries, etc. And we have this wonderful, Sarah McFarland was a feisty poet who lived on the margins of society, was quite poor. And so this is her little poem she wrote about the fact that people were going to stop her from picking cranberries. She's going to still pick them where I find them. The cultivation of cranberries started in the first quarter, the late first quarter of the 1800s. People really started thinking, how do I make this into an industry, not just something we go pick once ripe in the natural environment. And historians seem to agree that the first cultivated bogs were on Cape Cod. And Cape Cod wasn't that different in the mid-19th century from Duxbury. Both had been thriving economies, maritime economies, and both had seen that maritime economy go away, leaving kind of a long period of recession. So Duxbury wasn't that early in cultivating its cranberries, but we did have our first bog in 1857. And I point out here on the arrow where it is. This is an 1879 map of Duxbury, but our first bog was done by Stephen Nye Gifford. And then bogs started to become an important industry for Duxbury. Early pickers of the cranberries were drawn just from the local labor source. And so as the cranberries became ripened, as this painting from Mary Nye Gifford shows, it's something that women who were not employed at other times of the year might go and join the pickers so they could get some pin money. Children would go out and pick. And if you were in an industry like working in the factories or something, you might come home and do some picking yourself. And so we're still like the factory system in Lawrence and Lowell originally, the local labor force, it's a small industry and local labor can fulfill the amount of pickers that they need. And here's two photographs from the late 19th century of local bogs and families coming out and picking. As the industry grows, there's a symbiotic relationship between the increasing immigration from Cape Verde and the need for more labor as this becomes less of a family enterprise and there's larger, more corporate bogs coming along. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Mel because this is where the stories kind of merge. Oh, you're on mute, Mel.
sorry. So this is just a little bit to show you where the Cape Verde Islands are and where they, how they're sort of situated in the Atlantic. So there are 9 inhabited islands currently in Cabo Verde. They were, a little bit of background, they were discovered in 1456 by Portuguese explorers who began settling there within a few decades. And the islands became an important stopping place for a lot of maritime economies, including the slave trade, of course, from the 16th to the 19th century. So you can go to the next slide, Carolyn.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
I don't have this. Yeah. I wanted to share a little bit of photos from you from the Whaling Museum in New Bedford, who has a great collection of images from Cabo Verde. So these are both photos that were taken around the time where Chiquinho's novel starts. So that novel sort of starts around he's born around 1910, and these are about 1900. So the one on the left that shows a couple maybe outside of their home is from São Vicente, where Chiquinho eventually goes to school. And this other streetscape is from Brava, which is a different island, but great photos. If you actually have if you have this copy of the book, this is from the same collection in the Whaling Museum's photo archives.
Shall I move?
Sure, yeah. So we have a little bit of history here from the Whaling Museum. So the whaling industry was huge in bringing immigrants to Massachusetts, as Cabo Verde was a big stopping port for trade or lots of other reasons. And the captains would often pick up men who wanted to work. There were, let's see here, in the late 18th century to the early mid-19th century, while Cape Verde was experiencing a lot of droughts, 1830s, 1850s, 1860s, there were really historic famines at the time. And there were men were leaving in droves. There was a report where there were about 100 a year that came out around 1874. And there were a lot of opportunities in New Bedford and in the surrounding communities of New Bedford when men would arrive. And there were, particularly in the whaling, of course, also the textiles factories that were popping up, the agricultural, like cranberries or blueberries industries. And by the 20th century, which is sort of when Chiquinho's father has immigrated, there are a lot of Cape Verdeans who are owning packet ships that are leaving New Bedford to go back and forth to the islands. Between 1860 and 1960, about 40% of all of the packet ships that went to the islands from New Bedford were owned by Cape Verdean merchants, which is pretty great. And they started their own, you can go to the next slide, Carolyn. They started their own communities in New Bedford. So this is a photo of New Bedford from 1901. And the photo on the right is Our Lady of the Assumption Church in New Bedford, which is still there. It was started as the first Cape Verdean Catholic church in America, which was begun in 1905. So it's just a little bit of, so this sort of the entryway into Duxbury eventually, I think, so.
Okay, so from the communities of New Bedford and that are, as Mel said, are textile factory work, when the cranberries are ripened, a lot of those folks from New Bedford go into the fields and are migrant workers, whether on Cape Cod, Wareham. Funny, I read this book of, I don't know if you can see it. I read this book. This is a great book on the history of cranberries. And I grew up on Cape Cod. I'm from Cape Cod. And he kept referring to Cape Cod. And then he would say, like Carver. And I'm like, not Cape if you're from the Cape. But anyway. And these workers would be accommodated a lot of times because they are not from these communities and they don't have year-round residencies in these communities. They're accommodated on the bogs themselves. And these accommodations, as you can imagine, are not always the best. This is a view of one of the brochures for the Cape Cod Cranberry Company of Duxbury that is showing some of the worker accommodations on their bogs. And so I don't have any good sense of how many workers are coming through Duxbury in the latter part of the 19th century and the early 20th century. They're most assuredly coming to work on the bogs, but they're not yet living here. Now, eventually, Cape Verde folks start making Duxbury their home. And we can see in the 1920 census, that's the first census I come to that have Cape Verde immigrants as residents of Duxbury. And so Duxbury in 1920 has a total population, as you see here, just over 1,500 people. And we're just starting to seeing some Cape Verde men and sometimes with their families. And these are the spellings that are in the census at the time. And they're still, sometimes they'll say that they're in the cranberry work, and sometimes it says they're in highway work. So they're finding employment, not necessarily solely in the cranberry industry. By 1930, things have really changed. You can see the difference in this 1930 census compared to just the few families in the 20s. When I was preparing for this presentation, you may know, if you follow our Facebook, you may know that I do a house history every Friday. And those house histories run the gamut of very old 1600s houses all the way up to the present day. And so Tony Kelso and I were trying to find, I wanted to write a house history on a house built by one of the Cape Verde immigrants. We can see in the census records that they own their own homes. We know that they owned homes in Franklin Street in West Duxbury. So I do what I do, and I did deed research in order to trace back some of the houses. And what I found was a really compelling and interesting story that Mel and I have talked about, and we want to delve more deeply into. That just looking at deeds, I was able to discover that many of the Cape Verde men that came to Duxbury first, before their families were here, were pooling their resources and purchasing property communally, including in 1924, a bog. And from these property ownership communally, they were able then to each in turn buy each other out. And in the 1940s, the early 1940s, there's a large tract of land owned by the Lot Phillips Company over on Franklin Street, which is undeveloped at the time. And they're able to each purchase a lot of land and build houses. And that's how we have this wonderful community that exists on Franklin Street in that area. So it's a really great story of families being able to come here and become part of the community. That we see just from that. And that's why we want to get more stories. And we're so glad that a lot of people are here today that might have, this is your great grandparents or your grandparents that we can talk about. But so that is the end of kind of like our Duxbury piece. And now we can get into the book why we're here today. So I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Oh, and I see we already have a lot of questions.
That's great. Thank you. All right. So I don't know if anybody has any questions.
I want to speak.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. You know, the first cranberry bogs in Duxbury were with my uncle, my grandfather, Manuel, my uncle, Peter, Tony. These were all, Manuel. These are all my family. We had our own cranberry bog.
Great. Is this the one that's down by Hound's Ditch? Like
Hound's Ditch.
Hound's Ditch.
Where's the bog? You know where? I lose track of things, but you know where the golf course is in Duxbury?
Yeah. Yep.
Where you go across the street and you go down that dirt road all the way back up in there.
Yep.
That's where the first cranberry bog was, and that was put there by my family.
Yeah, that's the deed I found from 1924. That bog is still owned by the same descendants of the same family.
Yeah, that's ours.
Yeah.
And the Bulus were there,
Mhm.
and the Fernandez were there. And you know, if you want to know more, ask me. I'm an old man.
That's exactly why we're doing this program, so we can ask you. Absolutely, 100%. Mel is going to put our contact information up, and we absolutely want to hear everything.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, so our emails are in the chat if you guys have a chance to see it. And so please feel free. We'd love to continue talk about your family. We'd love to hear more about that kind of stuff, especially in Duxbury.
So to
Thank
me,
you.
this program's already been a success.
And you know, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Most of the Cape Verdeans that came, my grandparents came here, and I think it was 1904. That's when they first got here. And most of the people that came from Cape Verde back then came from Fogo, not Brava. Brava came later. Saint Anton, that never did come till way later. If you want to know the heart of the Cape Verdean community in Duxbury and in Marshfield, and well, that's my hometown, and brought up and down there, I'm telling you, it's Fogo, Jafo. And that, and that, you know, I'm hearing people talk like, you know, it's so Bronx, you speak Creole?
Not me.
Yeah.
So Bronx, but the cranberries.
Right.
And nós bendi Jafo.
Yeah.
Brava é mais, I gotta say it in English. Brava was more people who were a little more sophisticated, supposedly, a little more educated, whatever. But the Creole who came from Fogo that came here, and most of us came illegally on the boats to New Bedford. And then in New Bedford, my grandfather came in 1904. He built a house in Duxbury shortly afterwards, down where the cranberry bog is that we were just talking about. And he was bringing people from Cape Verde in the boats. They were coming and going. So, you know, I hear some people say things that, you know, I have you ever been to Cape Verde? I've been to Cape Verde. I fought in the jungles of Guinea for independence in the 70s for Cape Verde. I was at the United Nations, Cape Verde, Silvino da Luz, and all of those folk. That was the heart of the people. And in Duxbury now, I was just laying in bed thinking I could come up with like 17 families on Congress, Franklin, and that area up below there. And that's a Creole. We're Creole.
That's wonderful. And absolutely, my phone number, Mel's phone number, and our emails, we absolutely want to hear everything that you have to say and the stories you have to tell. And thank you so much for letting us know that you have that knowledge, because that's exactly what we're looking at.
I got a lot of stuff. If you want to, sometime, if we can work something out, okay. But it really kind of got me a little upset because I heard some things that didn't really get to the root of it at all.
We're here to learn, and that's exactly what we're hoping. Absolutely. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. You're welcome.
A separate program.
Yes, and that's, you're absolutely right, Laura. Mel and I are here to learn and hear from anybody that has this great wealth of knowledge, because we don't have it. And the sad fact is that it's being lost. And so we really, that's exactly why we chose this book. That's exactly why we are having this program, because we do not want that information to be lost or be interpreted by, me who only can look at primary sources. The voices are what's missing from this story, and it's so important. So
do you know where 555 Congress Street is?
I do know, and I just
That's my sister,
Yeah.
Tina.
that I looked up that deed. I read that deed. So
Yeah.
absolutely, that's
and my uncle Peter, way back in the day, that was a schoolhouse.
mhm.
That was also a hall where they had dances and stuff like that. 555 Congress Street. It's a home now, but back then it was just like an old hall. Have you ever met my sister Tina?
No, and I would love to.
I
So
bet she's listening right now. I bet.
good.
And 555 Congress Street. Did I hear her?
No, but you are my cousin because Tina Bruce is my cousin and Peter and Manuel were my great uncles. My father was John Diaz Jr.
Of course I know. Of course I know the DS.
Hi,
My
cousin.
sister was married to a DS. Of course I know.
This is great.
You know,
August,
Look at this, so many connections.
yes,
Right.
August Mendes Fernandez was the brother of Peter Fernandez.
that's my uncle.
Yes, and he was my second great grandfather. My grandmother was Ida Mendes Fernandez.
And where does Domingo Fernandez fit in?
Domingo
Fernandez.
was a brother of, everybody had a son after them and a grandson after them. So
Yeah.
there were 7. I have the family tree. There were 7 brothers, and it was Peter Mendes Fernandez, Manuel with Tina's.
That was my grandmother and grandfather, Manuel and Tina. Dominic, he married another Tina, and they lived in Carver. And right?
Domingo,
He's
that
on
was-
the Manuel family line of the Manuel brother. I'm from the August Mendes Fernandez line. He's on the Manuel Mendes Fernandez line. Then there's the Domingos family Mendes line. Peter Mendes Fernandez, who owned the schoolhouse which cousin Tina lives in, did not have kids. And
Doreen, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're going to move some questions.
Let me just.
We have some questions.
I got to say
so we're
one more
going
thing.
to keep
I gotta
going.
say,
I
let me say
will
one more
email.
thing.
I can email the family chart.
The last thing I want to say is this, okay? That even today, the Fernandez own the bogs in Carver.
Right,
That was
Yeah.
originally Dominic's, which was my uncle Dominic,
right.
and my cousins. They owned the big cranberry industry. The first cranberry bog by cranberry by Cape Verde in this country was my grandfather and the family.
Yeah,
I don't know this girl right here, this young lady right here, but she speaks the truth. She's speaking the truth, but
Right.
there's so much more deeper than that. If you really want to know about the cranberry industry for us, go talk to Dominic Fernandez in Carver. That's my cousin. His father owned and grandfather. That's the family tree right there.
You know,
So if you wanna know
Thank you.
what we'd like to do is move on to the book,
Okay.
but
okay.
we can keep this Zoom open after to still facilitate this conversation, which
No,
absolutely.
I have nothing more to say. I'm just telling you that
Yeah.
you can go to my sister Tina at Congress Street, the one you mentioned here. You can go to my cousin Dominic in Carver, who owns a big bog company. He owns a company. And as a matter of fact, the company that they still own, the name of that company is Fresh Meadow Farm.
Excellent.
That's
Okay, great.
Fresh Meadow Farm. If you start there and talk to you, they'll take you right down the whole trip. I'm too old; I can't remember stuff and all of that. But they can.
I think you remember everything. I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
We're gonna stay after. So we did have a couple questions come in, so we want to make sure that we get to those.
Yes, I just wanted to share information with you.
No,
and
and
get
we
it
definitely,
straight.
we're going to keep the chat open so we can keep this conversation going. But in the interest of time, we want to make sure we talk a little bit about the book that we're all here to kind of talk about. So we did have a question that came in. Why did, I'm assuming, Cape Verdeans emigrate so far to the US instead of closer locations in Europe or Africa?
What was that again?
It was just a general question I'm reading to the chat. So thank you, Joy, for your question. I think that we can probably stipulate it had a lot to do with the opportunities that were afforded by the people who were using Cabo Verde as a stopping point along maritime trades, whether it was whaling or any of the other. There are certainly large pockets of Cape Verdean communities in different parts of the world, though a lot did end up coming to the United States because a lot of ships would travel from the United States and would work their way back around, and that's where the people, the immigrants, would eventually end up. I think, did that answer your question, hopefully? And
oh, Cindy asks, is there any place in Duxbury where you can buy a book on this? No, which is why this is so important, because this history is not our history, Duxbury's history is not yet fully articulated. And so this is why we're doing this.
I do want to make sure that there is a copy of Chiquinho at the library in Duxbury that Suzanne has made sure that we know. So that's great. If you haven't had an opportunity to read the book beforehand, you can certainly go pick it up there. So it's a good step, which we're lucky to have only as of a few years ago when Dr. Almeida translated the story. Carlos, if you don't mind, can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure, I'll be honored to try to answer if I have the answer.
Do you mind talking a little bit about the experience of translating a language like Creole into English, since it's such a fluid language? You know, all the islands speak a little differently and have different versions of Creole. How was that experience?
Well, first of all, Melanie, thank you for inviting me to participate in this robust discussion about not only Chiquinho. I have already learned a lot about the connection of the Cape Verdean immigration to Duxbury that I was not too familiar with. So mostly about the book itself, Chiquinho, a novel of Cape Verde, was first published actually in Portuguese in 1947. And, of course, Portuguese is the official language of Cape Verde. But the author, Baltasar Lopes, was also a linguist. So the book
what is that correct program we have, Terry?
The book was very, although I am Cape Verdean, I was born in Sunny Cloud. You know, I know most, like all the variants and the idiomatic expressions. The book, the original, although written in Portuguese, had a lot of Cape Verdean expression. So
Right.
that was a layer of another layer of difficulty. Also, try to translate those idiomatic expressions in English. But just to briefly, give a summary of the, of the book for those people that have not read the book yet. The book is divided in 3 parts: childhood, Saint Vincent, and the Rains, where the protagonist, Chiquinho, protagonist Chiquinho, studies at the seminary high school in São Nicolau. He goes to São Vicente to finish high school and returns home to São Nicolau to be a teacher. But because of the cyclical droughts that goes to Cape Verde, many of his students start dying of hunger. And his father had immigrated to the United States back in 1915. So Chiquinho saw the opportunity to escape, to come join his father in New Bedford.
Right.
So that's where the author, Balthazar Lopes, paints, a little bit of the history, because not only Chiquinho is a history, it's a novel about Cape Verde, but it focuses a lot on the immigration to the United States that started during the whaling industry. So, and it talks about, of course, New Bedford, the whaling industry, the whaling ships that used to stop not only in Brava, but also in São Nicolau. São Nicolau is one of the ports where those whaling ships would also stop. So I know it's a lot. I could talk a lot more about the book, but to come back to your question, how, the Cape Verde Island has 9 islands, right? Inhabited 10, but 9 inhabitants, and you have different variants of the Creole. But the Cape Verdean expressions on the book, in the original book, mostly from expression from São Nicolau, which is where I'm from. But nevertheless, we had to, because it's not just me, but my co-translator, that we had to take a trip to Cape Verde and do some, some research on some of those expressions, so we could try the best as possible to render those expressions in English. I hope I answered.
No, it's great, and the translation is beautifully done. Reading it, so thank you for that. Do you have any recommendations if anybody wants to read other maybe Cape Verdean stories like this one?
There are, unfortunately, there are not that many translations,
right,
about the Cape Verdean novels, but but there are still some, mostly from Saint Vincent. I can think of the author Germano Almeida, who wrote, who has been translated into English. The title of the English translation of his book is The Will of Mr. Nepomuceno. That's a very interesting novel that has to do actually with a protagonist that migrates from São Nicolau to São Vicente and becomes one of the richest merchants in São Vicente. So that's another.
Thank you. That's great. I'm gonna have to write that one down.
Yeah, as far as Chiquinho goes, many, because we I hope, you know, one day I could go to your place and do a more formal presentation of the novel. But we have done several public presentation of the novel, and I have asked for like a survey, a reader survey of the novel, and some of what the readers' impressions. I am very curious about some of the readers' impression when they read the novel, if they found some of their own history in the novel, and some of the respondents said they, after reading the novel, they understood their history much better.
Yeah.
So
that's a great segue. If anybody has any responses maybe to reading the novel. Sandy, I see you.
Yes, Dr. Almeida, first of all, thank you so much for doing that work. It's just absolutely fabulous. And I thought of the book last night when I was watching this show about Ernest Hemingway, whose writing is so condensed and direct and conversational. And I thought of that book because it's the same way. I'm 2/3 of the way through, and I've read a couple of references directed to darker skinned Cape Verdeans coming from lighter skinned Cape Verdean. So if you could talk a little bit about that historically and also up to the present.
thank you, Sandy. That's an interesting point that you make, because on the book, the author mentions you know, about this conflict, if you will, amongst a lot of Cape Verdeans, you know, and this still colonial mentality about, you know, people from the continent are darker skinned and they are not educated and they are like savages or whatnot, and the lighter skins related more to, you know, more educated populace. So they're still, unfortunately, there is a bigger conversation to be had about some of these concepts. Of course, you know, we're talking about Cape Verdean history. That's another conversation, but 500 years of colonialism, you know, and oppression to some degree. It's hard to leave some of those inculcated myths in the Cape Verdean psyche, if you will. But that's a very interesting point that you bring in your reading of the novel. That's one of probably not one of points that are not brought up that much in the novel. Thank you so much for that question.
I like to know about the Cape Verdean before the Portuguese got there.
Okay, actually, you know, historian said, you know, when the Portuguese got to the Cape Verde Islands in 1460, there was no one living there. So the islands were deserted. Although there are some speculations that some people from the continent, mainly around Senegal, have gone to probably just to fish around those islands. They may have gotten to the most eastern side of the islands like Sal and Boa Vista, but there is no proof of that. So official history says that, you know, the Portuguese were the first ones to land on the islands, and then they started bringing enslaved people from the west coast of Africa. Okay,
So they did not have their language preserved, the west coast of African people?
oh, well, they brought their language, their culture with them when they were, brought to the islands, but they were forced, the Portuguese forced them to try to learn Portuguese, the rudimentary Portuguese. So in the process, they developed, Cape Verde developed this new language that most people call Cape Verdean Creole, which now we call just Cape Verdean language, which is based mostly from the forced Portuguese of the 16th century and a mixture of different African languages. So if you, I happen to also teach Cape Verdean language, if the most of the lexicon of the Cape Verdean language are based on the so-called broken Portuguese of the 16th century. Okay, but the grammatical structures are mostly different from the West African continent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Someone asked in the chat if it's similar to the Creole that is spoken in Louisiana.
No, yeah, that's, no, it is not. Actually, it's one thing that we've been trying to establish when we talk about, a language. We want to say we speak Cabo Verdeano, right? So that distinction, we speak Cabo Verdeano, meaning Cabo Verdean language, because we have so many different Creoles, and a lot of people, especially in the United States, when you mention Creole, most people would say, are you talking about Haitian Creole, or are you talking about the Creole spoken in Louisiana? No, it's the Cabo Verdean language. Of course, Creole, because it's a mixture of more than one language. Okay.
Thank you.
But if I may suggest, I know it's hard to change. For us Cape Verdeans, we do it all the time. It comes like natural. I have to make an effort to, when I say I speak Cabo Verdeano, instead I speak Creole, because if it's among us, or at least people that know what we're talking about, I just mentioned I speak Creole. But if we all start saying, I speak Cabo Verdeano, okay, that's no one who's gonna say it's Louisiana Creole or it's Haitian Creole. It's the Cape Verdean language. Like I say, I speak Portuguese, I speak French, I speak Cabo Verdeano.
Right. That's a good way to put it.
How different, Dr. Almeida, is the language of Cabo Verde from the Azores?
That's an interesting point. Of course, it's two different languages in a sense that the same, because the Azores, they speak Portuguese. The language is Portuguese. Although we speak Portuguese in Cape Verde, it's the official language of Cape Verde. However, the way I know your question is because the accent of the Portuguese from the Azores are different from the accent of the Portuguese from the continent. And a lot of the accent from the Portuguese of the Azores, we actually have a lot of similarities with the Cape Verdean language, okay? We have some expressions. I have a colleague from the Azores, a professor at Bristol Community College, and you know, one expression that I can think of is like when we say, "Estou means I am that tired. And the Azorian would use this expression, and we use that expression in Cabo Verdean as well, but it's not used in the continent. So we have some similar expression.
Thank you. I do want to make sure it is coming up on 1 o'clock. This program is an hour long, so if anybody has to leave, I'm going to drop the couple links in the chat. The first one's going to be for our book club next May on Be Held by Tarashia Nesbitt. There will be a link directly to our website, but we do want to tell you guys that the library, the Duxbury Library, has plenty of copies available if you want to go and check it out there. Suzanne, if you also want to drop a link in the chat for that, that's great. We're lucky to have Suzanne here with us from the library today. And the other one is going to be for our Wampanoag History program, which is next Thursday. So both of those will be in the chat right now. If you guys, we are going to keep the Zoom open for a few more minutes in case anybody wants to continue the conversations. But thank you all for coming to this. This has been great. And thank you, Dr. Almeida, again, for everything and helping us answer a lot of these questions today. So that's wonderful. And I'm going to drop those in the chat now. If anybody has any questions, please feel free.
Yeah, thank you. I see on a chat here, Doreen Diaz. I think she is explaining to, responding to Joy Mills' question about Creole. And thank you, Doreen, for also clarifying that it's, it's Criollo, if we're referring to Cape Verdean language. Also, I know not to misconstrue what I mentioned in my comment about broken Portuguese. Cape Verdean language is not broken Portuguese. It's its own language. It's its own right. And you mentioned the Alupec, which is now actually officially is Alfabeto Cabo Verdeano, but based on Alupec. And there is, yes, there is no C. That's another lesson for another day on about the Cape Verdean language. But yes, not to confuse it with Portuguese. And it is not, when I mentioned broken Portuguese of the 16th century, is when the language started to evolve. Okay, like languages are a living being. So if you read a Portuguese text of the 12th century, you think you were reading Spanish as well. So just to put that.
Thank you. And thank you, Doreen. That is very helpful. I'm glad you were there to help answer some questions. I'm just dropping one more link in the chat for everybody from Suzanne. Does anybody else have any questions or maybe comments about the book, reactions?
I did want to, Sandy, I thought your point that you made, because seeing Hemingway's, that never occurred to me when I was reading the book. However, now that you mention it, I do see that I happen to have loved the book. I thought it was beautiful. And I like a direct writing style, even though I don't have a direct writing style. But I thought that his use of language really made especially in the first part of the book, I was right there with him the whole time. I thought that it was very descriptive and made me really feel like not only visually what the landscape was like, but also his family reactions and the closeness of his family and that whole neighborhood, that village that he lived in was very well done. It was a very nice entree into learning about Cape Verde, for sure.
If I could ask Dr. Almeida,
Oh,
before your translation, do you have a sense of how widespread Chiquinho was read by folks?
oh, thank you for that question. Chiquinho is actually, I grew up in Cabo Verde. I went to high school there, and it was mandatory reading. We read Chiquinho in high school there, and I believe it still is. Now, in 2016, a Cape Verdean newspaper called Ana Sound did a survey of for people to name 10 most important books in or about Cape Verde. Any genre, not only novels, but could be poetry, short stories, journalism, or whatnot. And the result of the survey, Chiquinho was number one as the most important text in Cape Verde history to date. So Chiquinho, when we mention Chiquinho, almost everybody knows about the novel. Actually, San Nicolau Island is coined as the Chiquinho Island. So when we say, I'm going to the Chiquinho Island, everybody knows you're talking about you going to San Nicolau.
So can we assume somewhat that Chiquinho is autobiographical about Baltazar Lopes?
It's a lot of Baltazar Lopes, but of course he was a great writer. But it's a lot of autobiography of the author, but he fictionalized the character. Baltazar Lopes himself never came to America. Okay.
Right. It seems from what we could I could sort of get online that a lot of maybe it was influenced from his life, like you were saying, but it is like a fictional story. But he also grew I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but Baltazar Lopes was born in the same town as Chiquinho, right? And I think the dates are kind of close to each other.
Yes.
So I think there's some influence, but maybe it's not autobiographical 100%.
Yeah, but there are a lot of similarities between the character Chiquinho and the author Baltazar.
Right, and I think one being him and he did also start, a group of friends that published the Claridades, right? So they had a, sort of like a magazine of literature, like the Chiquinho does with his friends, who sort of start the labor movement, and so a lot of similarities, I think.
Yeah, I think most of it is autobiographical, with the exception of his coming to America to meet with his father. But most of the other stuff, you can just place Baltazar and Chiquinho's.
It's interesting you said you read it in school. That's where when we were talking about the Cape Verdean you know, stories in Duxbury and maybe trying to do a book club. My dad also read it. Both my parents were born there, so they both read it in high school. And when we found the translation, I was like, well, this is it, huh?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it worked out.
Yeah, I was honored to be a part of the translation, because way back, like when I was at UMass Dartmouth, I always thought about translating the book. They actually, there was a group that we did like a translation of just an excerpt of the novel. But I was lucky because I knew Balthazar Loeb's widow back then, and his son that actually was a contemporary of mine in high school in South.
Oh, wow.
So I every time I go to South Vicente, I go visit them. So I asked them permission to translate. I told them that this was a very important text that needed to be translated into English, because there are a lot of Cape Verdean Americans, particularly, that would love to learn part of their history through the novel. And so through that, we were able to, with Tagespresse at UMass Dartmouth, to partner and do this translation.
Chris, we did have a question that came in asking about the politics of Balthazar's time and him maybe having to speak in code to avoid persecution during the Novo Estado from 32 to 74.
Oh yeah, Balthazar was under the lupa of the PID, the Portuguese police, fascist police regime.
Mm-hmm.
So back then it was, of course, difficult. It was, it was difficult for them to mention anything that had to do with hunger. However, when you read Chiquinho, he mentioned fome, which but the writers had to use strategies not to, because if they would not allow them to publish anything. Actually, some of the magazines that they were trying to publish was cut by censorship. They were censored by the police because somehow they thought it was against the regime, the Portuguese Estado Novo by Salazar.
Right.
It was, ruled Portugal from 1929 to 1974, just before the independence. So, but of course, not only the Cape Verdeans, but the Portuguese. Right. A lot of Portuguese writers were punished actually by publishing texts or try to publish texts that was against them. I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe I can extend.
Yes, yeah, it really does bring to life that I read that section at the end of the book and found it pretty gripping, like, I don't know, there's so much politics here in the US, of course, about, what one can say, and it's not at all the same level where you could literally get persecuted by the government, and to get a better sense of that, it was something you just.
Yeah, he could not criticize the system directly. He had to use subterfuges in his writing so to bypass that. He could not confront that time he could not confront the Portuguese colonial powers. Talking about well, actually the book was most written during the 1930s, but it was only published in 1947. But Cape Verde didn't become independent until 1975. So you're talking about during that period, Baltazar could not confront the Portuguese colonial powers directly. He would be prosecuted. He would be in jail. So he had to use subterfuges in his writing.
Dr. Almeida, could you talk about, you mentioned independence in 75.
Mhm.
How are current conditions politically, socially, and economically in Cabo Verde?
Like night and day. Historically, Cape Verde has gone, through cyclical droughts, right? At times, a lot of people perish by hunger. And during, as you read the novel, you see that a lot of kids, Baltazar saying, starting to disappear from his class. They are dying of hunger, okay, because of the drought. The Portuguese abandoned Cape Verde at its own mercy. Before independence, a lot of percentage of illiteracy. Okay? Now, Cape Verde is a democratic country. Of course, the independence in 1975, PAIGC, back then is the party that fought for the independence of Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, was in power for 15 years. It was not democratic right after independence. It took about 15 years to open up for the multi-party system. So from 1992, when they opened up the multi-party system, the new party that was formed, MPD, which is actually in power now, won the election. So they were in power for 2 terms, 10 years, like each term is like 5 years. So the PAICV gained power again back in 2001, and they governed the Cape Verde for 15 years. So in 2016, MPD regained power. So, so there has been this alternative, like the Democrats and Republican Party in America, if you will. Now, actually, now they are starting the campaign. This year, there are elections, actually next week, April 18. So I'm following the dynamics of the campaign, if you will, to see if the PAICV regains power or the MPD stays in power. But there is a third party, which is smaller party, who see that is trying to at least gain some notoriety in the election. So I'm following that closely. But to answer your question in that sense, Cape Verde has come a long way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Almeida. Thank you, everybody, for staying on now a while longer past our hour time slot. But we unfortunately do have to, all get back to our work and lives at some point. So we want to say thank you again for everybody. We're definitely happy to continue this conversation. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me or Carolyn. If you have any questions for Dr. Almeida, we'll make sure that he gets them. And hopefully we'll see you guys all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank
go
you.
again.
Very
Bye,
nice.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a wonderful day.
You
You
too.
too.
You too.
Thank you.